tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham gacchāmi. One of the easiest starting points for getting to know oneself, and specifically that aspect of oneself that opens up a spiritual door and tunes in to what a more subtler aspect of our experience, of our existence, is generosity. So frequently when the Buddha was talking about his teaching, he would start with generosity, because most people will have had some generosity experience in their life, and among those many experiences which we might have passed through, where either we were the giver or we received, there are occasionally moments where it might spark something. There might be some moment of like just warm, fuzzy feeling. And that warm, fuzzy feeling, like of doing good or being a part of good or seeing good, like in whatever form that it's sort of touched one's life, is kind of the entryway, the easiest and most accessible entryway to understanding and getting familiar with that aspect of ourselves that is aligned on a spiritual dimension. And so occasionally people will, kind of come and ask me and just be like, have always struggled with spiritual development or accessing like anything in the spiritual world. And so usually for those people, I'll talk a lot about generosity, because frequently there are a lot of blocks to our internal world, to our old pains or traumas or whatever. And the kind of the nicest, smoothest, most natural entryway into what's going on inside ourselves are those moments of generosity, of kindness, of selfless service, and especially that subset of those activities that have struck an emotional chord. That there's been some aspect of our experience that knows the pleasure of that generosity and that kindness or the compassion that either we've done ourselves or that we've been the subject of. And the more we can recall those moments, especially the moments where we've been the giver, because when we can remember the moments like that we've given something, it also ignites that awareness that though that came from my intention, that came from an action that I have the ability to keep regenerating. And the Buddha often talked about kamma and karma, like the deeds that we do and the results that result from them. And he would often, especially to lay people, just go on and on about the benefits of giving. And he would say things like, if people really knew the benefits of giving, they wouldn't even so much as have a meal without giving a piece of it away to someone. Because the benefits of giving aren't just in that moment where you feel that kindness, you feel that good, warm, fuzzy feeling of like connection and generosity and the subtle, more balanced pleasure that it provokes, but also go to creating more social stability, as well as like leading us more towards situations that we're subject to kindness and there is more social functioning. And our sort of spiritual energy or resilience or power is like subtly nourished or filled um, from those acts of generosity, whether it's at a level of intention or speech or physical. But at any level, that intention of kindness, of compassion, of will, of like well-wishing or goodwill, they sort of fill our spiritual reservoir, and then gives us. And the more we do that, the more we find we have more energy, more balance, more strength, more stability, more health, more alignment, more sort of, because all of the roots of that, the kindness, the compassion, they're actually like they're balanced qualities when they're pure. And they're expansive qualities. Like they just aren't necessarily like the experience of generating an intention of kindness, one sort of is subtle on some subtle emotional level opening up, as opposed to like the sort of protection mechanisms or defense mechanisms that kind of close us down. So as we align with those intentions, we're able to like our health gets better, our energetic flow gets better, we become more aligned, as well as sort of spilling this spiritual reservoir of energy and pleasure and like inspiration, spiritual power gets sort of nourished. And wherever we go, we tend to be aligned and draw near to situations that are more full of people with those intentions. And so you can kind of work out the logic for yourself in the mind too. Like the more you're surrounded by kind, trustworthy, compassionate, like people, the more functional a community is going to be. The more they're respectful, they're trying to do good, to not do bad, the more like cohesive that society, that community, that family, that relationship's going to be. And so, and that kind of works in Buddhism. There's very much a worldview of past lives, that there are many, many different dimensions, and one can come back to this earth as a person or an animal or various types of spirits and angels and gods and everything. And so there's also the conception of like these intentions of purity, or really moral intentions, whether they're pure or impure, are sort of determining our direction, whether up or down or at the same level. And so the more these acts sort of accumulate, the more we gravitate not only in our present life towards specific types of communities, but also after death. That the realm of spirit or consciousness or karma is that those fundamental acts of selfless service, of kindness, of kind words, of good actions, they're also sort of charting our spiritual direction. And that's the aspect of, let's say, the cycle of action that determines what direction we're going in. And so it has those massive benefits of being pretty much accessible to everyone, no matter how detached and dissociated and disconnected from a spiritual dimension somebody might be. They can go and physically offer some object to another being, and it still works. Like it's still like whether they're aware of the spiritual power and the pleasure and the experience is happening or not, that it's still sort of subtly filling that cup and subtly giving you that pleasure and making the transition into reconnecting with that feeling that might be very painful, very like distorted or dysfunctional. It makes it easier. And so with a lot of people, this is my own sort of intuition around the thing, I think the Buddha could see that some people weren't necessarily ready to look inside. And so it was just all the time, very, very, very frequently, with lay people, he would talk about morality and generosity, morality and generosity. because those are sort of creating our spiritual baseline of what's going on inside ourselves. And regardless of whether we're in touch with that or not, the steps that we're taking towards creating a more trusting, more cohesive, more selfless, more kind relationships and environments, the more that's going, the more we can kind of start to bring down those defense mechanisms and start to tune into what's going on inside ourselves, as well as kind of creating this spiritual baseline that's more pleasurable and less painful. And the other side of that coin is, of course, morality. It's, in addition to doing good, it's even more important to not do bad. So the opposite side of that coin is that when one knowingly harms another being, there's a pain that goes along with that. And whether we call it remorse or regret, or it's just like you feel bad inside, you feel broken, that the more those sort of types of actions have been cultivated over the course of one's life, or potentially even past lives, that the more one has a lot of pain to face, or one has to face as one starts to open up one's spiritual dimension and one's experience. And so kind of like the most important, even more important than doing good, is that being very careful of like our knowing intentions, our actions, our, to what degree are we harming people, at least at a conscious level. You can't do anything about sincere mistakes or things that are beyond your level of intention. You can't purify the external world. What you can purify is the quality of your intention. And so there's some core pieces that I usually go through, just because it is good to have a little bit of specificity, because on course ones, most people that are at least going to come to a Dhamma talk are generally doing pretty good. But on more subtle levels, like there are subtle things that most people have some cleaning up to do. And that when we do that cleaning up, it sort of elevates the qualities of our relationships, and it also elevates all the people around us as well. As we start to maintain a higher moral standing, and especially as we end up, sometimes when you maintain some of these principles, it just naturally isolates you from some social activities that might be involved in just all the wrong speech. And subtly that affects society as well. People start to notice that, and it gives them the space to reflect on themselves and to see like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't be saying that. And so subtly, as individuals start to raise their standard of morality, not in a like judgmental sense or like a harsh sense, but just like trying to maintain a standard of conduct that they feel good about, it subtly starts to, like, people notice, and people internally, there's a part of most people who recognize like, oh yeah, it would be nice if we were all like that. And so there's 10 of these things that in the Buddhist conception of it are always bad karma. And bad karma means like the types of actions that will lead to some painful experience inside oneself. That the nature of consciousness is that when one does those acts, it either feels bad in the moment it feels bad in the moment at some subconscious level, potentially, but also leads to some painful results in the future, either primarily at a feeling level, and it becomes conducive to experience pain in the future at an external level as well. And so the first 3 are physical, the next 4 are verbal, and the last 3 are intentional. The 3 physical are killing any living being, so even an ant, an insect, a mosquito, and knowingly, intentionally killing, that is one of the things that's always going to be bad karma. And of course, all of these also depend on the quality of one's intention. It's one thing if one's trying to kill a being to put it out of its a difficult situation, and another thing if one's actually malicious. But in any case, these are always going to be a bad karma, and so um, yeah, that's sort of one aspect of the moral dimension. The second is stealing, knowingly stealing from another human being, something that one considers one's possessions. The third is wrong sexual actions. So actions that would harm someone that's, or someone's relationship, someone that's under the protection of someone else, that any sexual activity from someone that's being protected by someone else that isn't an independent adult, or things that are violent or against the law, or would fall under sexual wrong actions. The four of speech are speaking an intentional lie. And the speech ones tend to be where most people have more work to do. It's fairly easy to clean up one's physical actions. At speech, it becomes more difficult because we speak a lot more. But the first of the speech is speaking intentional lies. So for any reason, like whether it's convenience or because you want to avoid a difficult conversation or avoid something personal, but doesn't mean you have to answer every question, or but knowingly deceiving someone is always going to feel bad. And the more one gets in tune with one's experience, and one can start to feel that of like, oh, that didn't feel good, to knowingly deceive someone. And of course, it sort of subtly breaks down the trust level in all of one's relationships. When people get accustomed, it's like, oh yeah, it adds a layer of separation where I have to ask myself, like, I know this person lies sometimes, so are they saying that because they think that's what I want to hear, or because they want to get something from me, or are they saying that because that's actually true? So subtly, people can't really trust each other completely when lies become commonplace. The second is wrong, like speaking divisively. So those are words spoken when the intention is to divide. So fundamentally, most commonly, it's I'm telling you something bad about someone so that we're on a team against him or her or them. And so dividing people into camps, into groups, into us versus them, into the fundamental approach is like we're on a team against them, as opposed to we want to all come together and come to an understanding and work together, and like there's no reason for, we're on the same team. We don't need to be competing. Even if it's true, but if the motivation is divisive, then it falls under wrong speech. The third is speaking coarsely or harshly or vulgarly, things that are either said out of anger, or the types of things that people say out of anger, things like vulgarities or gratuitous insults, or things that are coarse. And the last is useless speech. Fundamentally, speech that doesn't serve any purpose. It's not trying to, help someone. It's not trying to serve myself somehow. It doesn't serve any purpose. It's just agitating because of either fear or ego or discomfort. But the idea behind noble speech is to really speak with purpose, speak things that are actually valuable to someone. And what that does is it really changes the degree to which we're comfortable with silence. It puts a check on sometimes our ego when we're trying to attract more attention to ourselves. It allows us to, what silence allows is it gives us time and space and calm to become more sensitive to our own emotional state, as well as the emotional states of those around us. And so the more we're crowding out that silence with useless words, the more it becomes a block to not just see ourselves, but also an obstacle for other people to have the silence they need to tune into what's going on inside themselves. So it's kind of coarsening the atmosphere, the vibe. And the last three are intentional, which is intentions of like greed or covetousness or envy, of constantly wanting more and more and more. Like the pleasures of the senses, like wanting things that are fundamentally one doesn't already have, trying to constantly be fueling the fire of greed and craving. And specifically for sense pleasures. So it's just, those are like, it's just a bad feeling. I don't know how to describe it better than that. But yeah, the more one's coveting things, the more like one's sort of fixated on the object and puts blocks around the damage that's coming from accumulating and amassing and protecting and defending those objects and experiences. The second of the intentional wrong action is intentions of hostility. So even if it doesn't cross the line of speech or actions, but if one consciously wishes harm to another being, it's gonna feel bad. It's gonna feel like a burning sensation, a tension inside, and it's going to kind of create an outward ripple of that intention that's not just damaging to oneself, it's also damaging to the environment. And so the result of that at some future point as well is going to be painful. And lastly is actually just what's called mundane wrong view in Buddhism, is like just believing that it's just this material world and there's no moral dimension and there's no right and there's no wrong and there's nothing beyond just this coarse material world that we're living in. There's no other world. There's no spiritual people that have seen any of it. The active shutting out of the moral dimension or spiritual dimension is actually considered wrong, like bad karma as well. It's like itself, like that block on our own moral experience is something that's doing active harm. It's not just like, it's not just like blissful ignorance. It's actually blocking us off from an important part of experience and doing like, it's blinding us from the consequences of that are happening on that level. And so it's useful to go through them. The people that have attended my talks before have heard them lots of times, but it's always useful to kind of have some level of specificity, because it helps us be more concrete in like reviewing our own actions and trying to raise our own standards and like looking at like, oh, okay, yeah, that was probably not 100% true, and adjusting our behavior. And the more we do, the more we become aligned with that like good feeling of like sometimes doing good, but also the good feeling that just comes from like being clean. Like I don't have anything to regret. I don't have anyone to avoid. I don't have anything to hide. Internally, you're like, you don't have any problem being open. All of the blocks like become increasingly unneeded. And so all of that is by far the most important thing that the average person can do to develop spiritually. Is like, because that's creating the underlying baseline. As long as there's still kind of trash being thrown in there, like every time you open up to your own emotional, spiritual consciousness experience, like it's a mess in there, and so you just want to close it down again. And even if you have the tools to calm down the agitation, if the seeds of pain are still being sown, like there's not going to be ever a desire to touch into that internal spiritual aspect of our experience, because it's so painful in there. But the more we take steps to like cleaning up our actions and to like going through life with this sense of spiritual purity and kindness and compassion, and the more naturally this sense of calm and balance and contentment and happiness and objectivity and neutrality and like just like stillness, calm, balance, equanimity. These sort of naturally happen because the qualities of kindness and compassion is that they're balanced qualities. And the qualities of like hostility or sensual desire or craving or doing harm, like all of these are rooted in some sort of, I don't know, emotional, spiritual distortions or agitations or energetic, chaotic experiences. And so the more we're sowing those seeds, the more those are going to be the emotional experiences that are become the norm. And so every time we touch into what's going on inside ourselves, those are going to pop right up, and it's going to be a difficult, agitated, disconnected, somehow dysfunctional experience that we're touching into. And so cleaning up that is like kind of step number one. The more morally clean one is, the more one can just sit on the couch at home and like just take time to oneself, and like the more it's just like it's just totally fine. You can just sit on the couch, be by yourself, relaxed, without any agitation. But yeah, and so that transition into what's going on inside ourselves is much more natural the more clean, the more pure our lives have been. The second step that I'll talk about before I kind of move into the meditation, and it's sort of, there is a natural transition there, like the covetousness, the desire for sensuality. There's the maybe the coarser version is like greed and wanting more and more and more, and things that aren't ours, and trying to control and accumulate and amass, and surrounded by sensual pleasures. And maybe at a more subtle level, but still more or less the same underlying intention, is like being constantly pulled around by our sensual desires. So even if we're not necessarily greedy people or like coveting after other people's stuff, but we still might be pulled around by like, oh, I want that sight, I want that smell, I want that sound, I want that taste, I want that touch. And so all of these subtle attachments that we've created over the course of our lifetime and potentially many past lifetimes, these sort of subtle attachments have been created. And these subtle attachments in their, what we normally created that attachment because it was something that felt good. But we didn't realize that that attachment also sowed the seed of being pulled back towards that object every time we see it again, or the need to protect that object when we feel like it's going to pass away, or someone's going to steal it, or it's going to go through its natural process of destruction. And so these subtle attachments over the course of the time, if we're not conscious about that process, like each one of those attachments is another pull, and the stronger the attachment, the stronger the pull. The more I feel like I can't live without this object, whether it's a physical object or an experience or another person, the more deep that attachment, the more it defines and tightens our experience. And so if we're not sort of conscious of that process, we go through life and indulging and relishing and delighting, and sooner or later we find ourselves like pulled from all these tensions because we can't control all of them, both because it might involve other people who have their own decision-making and free will and agency, or just because objects aren't going to last forever. They come together, they fall apart. Maybe because with the nature of objects is somebody can steal them. Maybe because in the process of our giving up these physical bodies that we don't take all of our objects with us. And so, so subconsciously, or sometimes even consciously, we know these things aren't within our control, and that creates the stress. That creates the knowing that we are have the potential to be separated from this object or person or experience, leaves us in this state of like, I need to I need to control the world so that this object never goes out of existence, or that I am never separated from this person, which is impossible. And so it's a stressful life. And so fundamentally addressing that broader perspective of what's agitating the mind in the first place, I like to address before meditation, which is the conscious aligning, calming, settling, tuning in to what's going on and the tensions that we have. So it doesn't do that much good to let go of all the tensions and to calm the mind if you get right back into your car and go right back into your family and agitate the mind right back up again. Unless people really understand what's agitating the mind, it's a lot of times much more higher yielding in the long term for people to like cut back on like the sources of agitation and the like clingings and the attachments that we know we have, and we know like we're not going to be able to like control, and we know are causing us stress and might be creating physical problems and energetic problems and spiritual blocks. And so the more we can go through life with just a more detached perspective, and that's not in any way like different than the wholesome and the unwholesome conversation from before. When one's really kind, like selflessly kind, there's no actual attachment there. It's a kindness without grabbing hold. And for a lot of people, those things are very mixed up together, so it can be confusing. They're kind, but there's subtle people pleasing. There's kindness, but there's like avoidance of something. There's kindness, but there's attachment to the object of that kindness. Like these things are, it's just natural. Like kindness feels good. So when we delight in that feeling good, sometimes it's easy to misattribute the feeling good to like the object as opposed to the kindness itself. And so it needs to be a very conscious process to try to disentangle those two, so that we're really moving through the world with the like detached, unconditional kindness, balanced, calm, like equanimous kindness, as opposed to an entangled kindness, or that leaves one sort of entangled with the objects of one's kindness. And so the more we kind of can integrate this aspect of just kind of taking note, like, okay, I get attached, and then I have to go through this whole process of worry and conflict and trying to control and manage and get people to do what I want and say what I want, or at least avoid the things that I don't want. And the more one can see the consequences of all those like things that we're holding on to, the more it becomes more natural of like, it's not worth it. I don't want to keep agitating the mind. I don't want to keep spending my life trying to control something that I'm not going to be able to take with me after I die anyway. And the more that integrates, the more we can kind of coach ourselves to let go. And initially, that's very much like a process. It's extremely rare that someone just thinks like, oh yeah, this is really stressing me out, I'm going to let it go. And then you let it go. If that happens, then usually the attachment wasn't that deep. Most of the time, there's a sort of a withdrawal period where it's like, oh, I really want that, but it's causing me health problems. Oh, I really want that, but like I'm getting unwholesomely attached to this person, and it's creating a weird, not healthy dynamic. I want that, but let me think about the consequences and like come back into this place of like balance, this place of selfless service, this place of calm, and so there's a period where it's easier just to go back to the object and to like fill whatever the craving, satiate it instead of try to come out of it. But the addiction only gets fed. Like you only get more. You're only feeding that impulse, and the impulse doesn't go away. It's like it still wants to go back to the object or the experience or the person or whatever one's attached to. But the freedom that comes, or maybe even not free, like as one actually comes to a place where one lets it go, and there's a subtle tension physically or energetically that gets released, and and what isn't pulled around by that impulse anymore, or at least that impulse gets weaker and weaker and weaker until it eventually is gone completely. And so understanding that process of like, okay, it's hard right now, it's easy to go back and just satiate it, and then I won't have to deal with it, but I'll only be feeding it, and I'll still be addicted to it. Or I could like deal with the emotional impulse and try to come back into balance. And and it's going to be hard, but eventually I will be free. I won't have that tension, I won't have that complication, I won't have that like tug at me, and I'll be more calm, more relaxed, more like open, because I'm not pulled around by those desires. And so it's good to have that sort of intellectual clarity so that the mind can kind of coach the emotions when they are being pulled, and sort of remind it, like, I know where this is going, I don't want to keep doing, I've lived that life before and it wasn't serving me. And then there is, and this is also where the more goodness one has, the more it becomes a spiritual resource and an alternative. Because if there is no other pleasure than the sensual pleasure, then one can't ever completely come out of it. But if there is like a source of pleasure and calm and peace and good feeling and relaxation that doesn't come from the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the touch, then we can kind of use that as like a little bit of a bargaining chip for our subconscious or our consciousness. That like, yeah, it's easy to go back to the sense pleasure, but you have kindness. You don't need to go back to the sense pleasure. It's better, it's more balanced. It's like there's no hangover, there's no withdrawal, it's also more sustainable, and in them, because it's more balanced, it's more longer lasting and enduring and relaxing and opening. And so the more familiar and accessible those wholesome qualities of kindness, compassion, happiness, objective observation become, the more there's an alternative. It's not just give up this sense of pleasure and then like, okay, I have nothing. It's like, go give up that sensual pleasure and move back into the kindness. Even if one's not running around trying to do good things in the world, even just the intention of kindness, or even recollecting the acts of kindness that one's done in the past, it offers a window back into that experience. And that's where we can start to build and start to create a greater sense of perspective and seeing things as they really are. And that's what allows us. It's like you need a place, or like when you're completely off balance, you kind of let go of that thing and then you just fall down, or you don't have any grounding, you don't have any base of stability. When you have this core basis of these wholesome spiritual qualities of kindness, compassion, happiness, objective observation, you have like a spiritual frequency, resonance, experience, like that is more grounded, that's more stable. And so when you let go, you kind of move into that stability because it's there as an undercurrent that you've been cultivating over some period of time. Okay. I'll leave the talk part there, and I'll kind of pick up from where I left off, a few steps into the guided meditation. But you can pause for a second, and then I'll start sort of a guided meditation, just to give people a sense, like meditation. Sometimes sometimes I don't like the word of meditation because I don't know if it's well defined in the English language. I'm not sure I know what it means exactly, or that, it's kind of just, but it's really many things. It's the conscious cultivation of like good qualities and abandoning of bad qualities. It's a calming down and focusing of one's mind. And in that calming down and focusing of one's mind, as one's mind gets more subtle and more focused, it's aligning one's conscious mind with one's subconscious mind. Or sometimes I use the terms one's mind with one's consciousness. And so aligning both what we're consciously aware of in our thoughts and in our brain becomes aligned with what we're actually feeling and associating as that's happening. And yeah, I will leave it there, and then we can start the guided meditation. And just sit for another few minutes quietly, and then I'll start. This is a good time. If people need to stand up or stretch, we can take a mini break right here, and then I'll start whenever people are situated again. So one good starting point is to try to maintain the back as erect as one can comfortably sit. And as one's breathing in deeply, one's aware one's breathing in deeply. As one's breathing out deeply, one's aware one's breathing out deeply. and in practice, I'll go through a whole progression today, but in practice, if one wants to practice on one's own, one can stay with the deep breath as long as one feels useful. And very frequently, really, even though I'll be going through a series of meditation objects, in practice, frequently it's very common to spend as much time with one's thoughts and emotions and impulses and memories and things I should have done or shouldn't have done. And that's part of the process. Like on a certain level, the breath is there to give us an object to focus the mind on something that's really happening inside ourselves or inside our body, inside our experience. And to give ourselves an object that's tuned in to also what's going on emotionally, subconsciously. Our breath is going to be subtly affected depending on whether we're fearful or worried or angry or desiring something, or calm or relaxed or depressed or dissociated. And so as our conscious mind learns to focus on the breath, and it can start out as a deep breath if it feels useful. It also starts to get a window into like the communication and the tag team nature between one's mind and one's consciousness as they're both subtly regulating the breath. Additional benefits to the deep breath is that it gives us a little bit of a coarser object to be able to focus on our mind on. So if one knows one's mind is really agitated, it's sometimes helpful to stay a bit longer with the deep breath because there's so much energy pulling it away that having a coarser object allows one to succeed a little bit more in maintaining one's focus. Additionally, you're getting oxygen to your brain, your lungs, your blood, and so especially if one's struggling with like falling asleep or tiredness or sluggishness or just generalized sense of depression or lethargy, then deep breaths can be helpful in maintaining one's alertness, one's awakeness. Initially, sometimes we have to push extra hard and put extra attention and effort into maintaining our focus because the agitation, the sources of dissociation are too strong. But eventually, that as one's able to maintain one's focus on one's breath for a little bit of time, that one can start to prioritize a sense of balance, a sense of calm, a sense of just putting less and less effort, less and less tension, less and less force into maintaining the awareness, and more when sort of releasing any tension that's being created in the direction of the mind. And that mental direction is also what's keeping the breath deep. And so as one starts to release that intense focus or the direction, the mental direction or force that's keeping one's focus, one's trying to maintain that focus but release the tension. I forgot to mention also, sometimes at the beginning, it's useful to localize one's awareness at like one point around the mouth. Once one is able to focus one's mind, one can sort of expand the awareness of the breath, but initially sometimes it's useful to just maintain one point or a small area where one can focus the mind. To a narrow area is easier to focus on than a broader area. So initially we can use a narrow area. As one's able to focus one's mind, even with the calm and natural breath, one can put more and more of an emphasis on relaxing the mind, on calming the mind, still maintaining the focus, but releasing any tension whatsoever. So it's just an effortless focus. It's just a completely calm and balanced and relaxed. Almost as if the mind is just centered and sitting. It's kind of like you're just effortlessly looking at an object. And there's no tension around that. There's no tightness around it. You're just completely focused, but without any tension. naturally, as the mind gets less and less agitated and more subtle, the breath is naturally going to get softer and softer and shorter and shorter. And so sometimes it can be a challenge to maintain the focus, but that's the goal, once maintaining sort of a complete focus with a greater and greater sense of calm and relaxation. When one's mind is calm, is relaxed, is subtle enough or settled enough that can do that for some time, say 30 seconds, a minute, or whatever feels like, okay, my mind's not jumping around. One can just start to widen that focus. So instead of just being narrowed down to a point or a small area around the mouth, one can widen the lens so that one's still aware of the breath, but aware of the breath as it's moving all the way through the body. As one breathes in, one feels the whole body. As one breathes out, one feels the whole body. Experiences the whole body. As one breathes in, one experiences the whole body. It's the subtle feeling going on anywhere in the body. Anything that's going on in the scalp or the back of the head, the ears, or the forehead, or eyes, cheeks, nose, mouth, jaw, neck, shoulders, upper arm, lower arm, wrists, hands, neck, the chest, torso, all the way down, the back of the neck, upper back, lower back, hips, bottom, thighs, calves, the ankles, the feet, soles of the feet. And as one breathes in, one can relax any attachment to anything in the body, any tension anywhere in the body, any tension, any tightness, any attachment anywhere that's forming in the body. As one breathes in, relaxes any attachment to the body. As one breathes out, relaxes any bodily attachment. And so one can still be aligned with the breath, but no longer around this sort of small area. One's just aware of this subtle energetic flow that's happening through in all these bodily systems, and how the breath is subtly affecting everything going on in the body. So one breathes in, there's a sort of subtle energetic flow upwards. As one breathes out, subtle energetic flow downwards. So one's feeling the whole body. As one breathes in, experiencing the whole body. As one breathes out. Relaxing any bodily attachment. As one breathes in, relaxing any bodily attachment. As one breathes out. So while we're going through this progression, this is just, let's say, an initial progression, but one can keep using this core initial progression for weeks and months and years, and it's always going to be important and essential. One's never going to completely detach from this aspect of awareness and experience. But in practice, there's going to be another dimension of things that we're doing on top of this basic awareness of the body, of the physiological process of the body, of the subtle effects that the breath is having on the body, on the tension and attachment that we're creating to the body and the releasing of them, that along with that process and that progression, those objects can be in the forefront of the mind, but they also can just eventually, over time and effort and consistency, just be sort of subtly integrated into one's experience and awareness. But on top of those core sort of meditation objects and alignment of awareness of what's going on in the body, there's also this, let's say, consciously cultivating good qualities and abandoning bad qualities. Because in practice, it fairly rarely happens that for someone starting, that they just sit down and they completely align and they immediately focus on their breath and they're immediately aware of their whole body and they're immediately calm and balanced. Usually what happens is when one focuses on the breath or maybe the body and starts to relax all the tension of the body, and in this process of either trying to focus the mind initially or in the process of releasing some of those tensions that are all old fears and memories and worries and agitations and desires and hostilities, they all are there to arise. And that's kind of the purpose. That's kind of exactly what we're here for. We can never be free of these old reactions if we don't allow the memories and associations associated with those attachments or tensions or reactions or impulses to arise, and to be able to change that reaction. It's not like, let's say you're addicted to something, alcohol or drugs or something. And initially, it's important to take time when you don't have the stimuli so that you have time to regain that sense of balance and alignment and awareness. But eventually, you're not free of that addiction until you can be around that object and not feel any reaction to it. And so part of what one can conceive of what one's doing in the process of meditation is that as one focuses the mind and starts to rein in the letting the mind go out to stimuli, whether those stimuli are sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, or just old memories and thoughts and desires and projections about the past and the future. As soon as one starts to remove new stimuli or rehash old stimuli, that our subconscious mind, the old suppressed reactions and pains and vulnerabilities and grief and anger and desire, like all of those old habits and the memories that went along with them, will come to the fore and present themselves in one's mind's eye. And so, for example, let's say some object of the senses, some sensual desire comes up and pulls one out. One's trying to focus on one's breath or one's body, and the mind, this old desire for one reason or another has come up. Depending on how strong it is, if it's easy enough to just return to the breath and to focus and to just try harder and rein it in, then one can do that. It's always available. Just, once sort of falls out of balance, you come back into balance. It's fine. However, sometimes if the pull is very strong, one's mind keeps obsessing, it keeps going back to that object. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, any of that whole realm. The mind keeps obsessing over a particular sense object. One of the there's two core approaches to dealing with that desire explicitly, as opposed to just coming back to the breath, just trying to come back into balance. Sometimes one needs to actually address the sensual desire explicitly. The two main, let's say, meditation objects, and really there are two classes, is one is you just break it into its constituent parts. So everything's just made of earth, liquids, heat, movement. And if you break it all up into those parts, then usually the object's not as attractive anymore. So if it's a person, you break them up into flesh and blood and bones and liquids and solids separate. The person's not that attractive. It's like food, you might break it up into, okay, here's the flour, here's the water and sugar. It's just the same thing that I've been eating every day. If it's some experience, you can just break it up. It's like, this is just the same earth and liquid and heat and movement. It's just the same thing, just put together in a slightly different design, and I think it looks beautiful, but it's the same stuff. It's not that insane. So that's the first technique, is you just sort of break it up into its constituent parts, and you look at it as it is. It's just like, just flesh and blood and dirt, water. It's not that infatuating. And the second approach is like, you imagine that thing passing away. The nature of anything in the material world is it comes together, it breaks down. So whether it's people, buildings, possessions, experiences, like everything comes together, falls apart. You just sort of like play out that process. Like, okay, the person gets old, they're sick, they die, they become, a corpse and a skeleton. They just all sort of break down and melt back into the earth. It's just that process of it. Same thing with building, you break it up, you can maintain it for a while, but eventually, people die, and then it just gets destroyed or goes back into the earth through the natural course of things. So in sort of coaching oneself into seeing things as they truly are, just composed of elements, just going back to elements, just these core characteristics that compose all things, all material things. And with the opposite side, with hostility, one's being like just overwhelmed with anger and hostility and hatred and cruelty and all of these negative intentions. And frequently, when people might have developed the habit of not necessarily directing hostility outward because it's not socially acceptable, but developing that sense of hostility inwards, which is just as painful, just as toxic, just as not just currently painful, but just creating a whole course of pain for oneself. And so to try to come out of hostility when it's either overwhelmed one, or if one knows that's something that I've struggled with, and one can lean into more the kindness and compassion, and especially the compassion, because frequently anger comes from either pain or avoidance of some pain. Sort of the terror that comes from being faced with something one can't overcome. And if one can address that pain and listen and acknowledge and feel that pain inside oneself primarily, but eventually one can spread that compassion to everyone. But if one can tune into that pain with a sense of like just support and patience and listening and acknowledgement and well-wishing and a desire for ourselves to come out of that pain and let that pain sort of arise and pass away as is its nature to do. that's an antidote for anger. If the pain's already being addressed internally and potentially externally as well, then there's no need for anger. It's just it's a short-sighted, self-destructive reaction to feeling backed into a corner, to be hurt or harmed. And one can realize and address and take the time to sit with and process the pain inside ourselves, it becomes much easier to see that very frequently the one who might have harmed us, or the situation that might have harmed us, is going through that same unwholesome process themselves. That they're struggling and reacting in short-sighted and self-destructive ways. And we can acknowledge and be patient and extend that compassion to not just that person, but any being that's in pain. That's the nature of compassion, is that it doesn't want any being to be in pain. It just wants to soothe, to heal, to help people move on. And so those are two of the useful topical tools that, especially when one either knows one struggles with either sensual desire or hostility on a regular basis, or it's just at a moment, has a moment or a day or a few days where, for whatever reason, those unwholesome reactions are coming up. It's sometimes you need to address them directly, and that by addressing them directly, one can come back into balance, as opposed to just trying to focus on the balance. And sometimes the forces are too strong. One needs to actually deal with them, have them be the focus of your effort, as opposed to just try to focus on a subtler object like the breath of the body. And fundamentally, those are the two reactions to the world, or sensory stimuli. Either I want it or I don't want it. You're either trying to get it or you're trying to push it away. And if you're neither trying to get it, you're not trying to push it away, then at least as far as sense pleasures are concerned, you kind of have a base level of balance. And you can return to the breath as a primary object. And also, if one knows one's going into a meditation with a lot of agitation, one can put extra effort into the sense of calm and relaxation, put extra effort into seeing how that agitation or fear or worry might be living itself out as tension in the body. The tendency for fear is to tend to tighten up. And if one puts more effort into calm and relaxation, both the mind and the body, it cuts away half of the cycle. One still might be fear or worried or agitated, but one's counteracting that fear at a physical level, and then trying to focus one's mind in a gentle, relaxed, calm way. You're sort of between the focus and the relaxation, you're putting more of an emphasis on relaxation, so that because fear and agitation and worry and anxiety tend to be already very alert, very aware, almost hyper vigilant sometimes. And so one doesn't have to put more effort on focusing the mind. One has to put more effort on relaxing the mind and calming the body, calming the mind and relaxing the body and settling. And letting that fear and agitation and worry, letting it all calm and settle, softer, softer, more and more subtle, more balanced, more calm, is the priority. But if on the other side, one's not over agitated, but sort of under agitated, one's sluggish, one's sleepy, one's depressive, one's avoidant, one's dissociated or disconnected, then it's the opposite. One has to put more effort into being present and more effort into focus, into staying present in whatever form that can take. So it's a time when, if one can experiment with walking meditation just to stay awake and stay present, or try opening one's eyes, or just try, you're really trying to focus on maintaining energy and be present, not letting oneself disconnect. Even if it's painful, even if there's some vulnerability that one doesn't want to address or expose, but just trying to not sink into the depressive, murky state of dissociation. And all of this is all the while sort of focusing on the breath. But just as one's focusing on the breath, one's also taking into account what the emotional state behind it is. Or what is it? If there's any sort of imbalance or avoidance or dissociation, then each of those, the sensual desire, the hostility, the agitation and worry, or the sluggishness and depression, they each have like a different way of avoiding this sense of balance, calm, focused awareness. And so depending on the direction in which one is out of that sense of calm, balanced awareness, determines where one needs to put effort to come back into that experience of calm and balanced awareness. And as one develops the skill to get back to the calm, balanced awareness, one starts to get more familiar with that state and one knows what it feels like, and one can eventually get to the point where one has it with enough, let's say, continuity or consistency that it turns into a good feeling, with deep happiness. Already one can feel, as one lets go, as one lets, like, kind of releases tensions in the body, one knows that, like, the tension doesn't feel good, the release feels good. as one releases tensions all over the body, all through the body, there's already this sort of subtle, like, oh, okay, I feel good, I feel relaxed now. Like it's now I'm not using all of my energy tightening up the body because I'm in fear, trauma mode. I'm allowed to be more relaxed and more open, and like it's just sort of a much more natural, smooth, energetic flow that kind of flows all the way through the body. Each one of those tensions was a subtle block that didn't allow one to feel and to experience and to let like the natural energy flow that happens throughout the body to like go unobstructed. And so the more one releases those tensions, the more that energetic flow just happens much more naturally, and it's just a lot more pleasurable. So all of these things are like all happening together. One's consciousness feels like more and more happy as like all of its energy isn't being wasted on these like agitated states, these tense or burning or stirred up state. So like it's just happy to not be jumping around and trying to do a bunch of work that weren't helping. And the body relaxes, and so there's a good feeling that manifests as in the body. And then from the sense of balance and the relaxation, there's this subtle energetic feeling of pleasure that just naturally starts up. Sooner or later. Doesn't necessarily mean it starts on demand, or a lot of times there's old pains and old feelings that we're guarding, and they sometimes need to come to the surface first. And so as we're still in the withdrawal phase of like, oh, it hurts so much to be without this, or we're dealing with the after effects of maybe things that we did in our lives that weren't so moral. The natural progression of it is, though, that as we develop more of this sense of balance, it eventually turns into this deep happiness. And eventually, as the tension gets released all the way through the body, the subtle energetic flow that's happening through the body, the sensation, the vibration, it becomes eventually more and more pleasure. And eventually that experience could turn into a sense of joy and even more complete pleasure that it's happening all the through the body. But it's a very aligned, balanced, focused experience that just naturally comes from you abandon like all of this wasting energy on unwholesome reactions, and then just kind of like all of this energy sort of pools and fills up this spiritual reservoir inside oneself. And then sooner or later, it could happen, it could be years, or it could happen quite quickly depending on the person and their karma and their own experience. But eventually it turns into this sense of joy. But it's a very aligned, calm, balanced, like the joy is like energetic, but it's a very like it's a very balanced and aligned sense of joy. It's joy based in withdrawing from the world. It's joy based in abandoning sensual pleasures. Once there's no tension left, and there's this sort of clear energetic flow of things, then eventually, sooner or later, the choice. And in this sense of, with the calm, balanced awareness, at any of these stages, as long as one has calm, balanced awareness, but then the more complete this sense of like pleasure gives us the sense of safety and the sense of comfort and the sense of like, just like we're not defending against anything. We're not fearing anything. We're not holding on to anything. We're just aligned, balanced, clear. That as we have that basis, then we can start to look at more painful aspects of reality. And that's really in Buddhism like the birthplace of wisdom, of transcendent wisdom. That when we're not just, let's say, developing good spiritual qualities, but also integrating those wholesome spiritual qualities with the painful aspects of the world, of our experience, of the nature of the world that we live in. And that's the whole gamut of pain, from, say, birth, painful, aging, death, grief, mourning, pain, physical pain, suffering, tension, being separated from those we love, being stuck with those we don't love, not getting what we want. Even just the core, going into and out of experience, the sort of subtle burning of experience of our bodies, of our feelings, of our associations, the attachments or impulses or the bare perceptions, just the subtle burning of existence. So as one can start to have this sense of balance, to be able to integrate this pain, it helps see the whole picture. It's not that we need to be fixated on pain, it's just that our delusion tends to focus on the pleasure and shut out the painful aspects of either our experience or just inherent in the nature of existence, of the process of creation and destruction. And the more tightly that we're hanging on to those things that are created, the more painful it is that when they're destroyed. And understanding that role, that it's our craving and attachment and identification with these experiences, these feelings, these bodies, these associations, these ideas, these constructions, like these perceptions, even just the bare perception of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. One can, as one's aligned, one can see the coming into and going out of existence of all of these things. One can see the arising and passing, or experience directly the impermanent nature of these things. And also one's gotten very familiar initially through the body of what that attachment feels like. It's like a subtle tension that's being created. At the level of consciousness as well, there's these attachments of consciousness, these identifications that are creating subtle tensions as well, and that are creating subtle pain in the attachment, but also even more pain when that thing that we've attached to, that concept of ourselves, that idea that we thought of, that feeling that we felt, when they pass away or they change and they don't go the way that we want. The more deeply we've identified with the pleasure, the more intolerable the pain comes when it arises. And so one starts to see the role of craving and attachment and identification in that cycle of like binding to things and the pain that comes from separation. The more completely and integrated that process becomes, or that understanding becomes, the more we start to experience not just the release of tension in the body, but the release of tension in our consciousness, in our emotional state. And we experience like a greater and greater sense of release, being free. And the benefit of that release is that it is, you could call it a certain type of pleasure, if you wanted. But it's a pleasure that doesn't depend on anything. It's not arising and passing away. It's just based on release. It's just based on unbinding and being more free, more unbound. And so in that freedom, one starts to know that it's not dependent on anything. It has more potential than any pleasure or any joy than one can experience, because every sensation, pleasure that's happening at the level of feeling or sensation is arising and passing away. Any joy that arises in one's mind or in one's consciousness is also arising and passing away. But the release is simply the unbinding from those things that are arising and passing away. And so that freedom or release allows one to initially expand just beyond, one's becoming unlimited, becoming unbound, immeasurable, like it's becoming more free. And when it comes to the point that one's looked at one's experience and this nature of arising and passing away, and the connection between craving and attachment and pain and suffering of losing those things that one's attached to, the more that understanding becomes integrated, the more one's craving and one's impulses to grab hold of them gets worn away. And when one gets to a point when the understanding is integrated completely and the impulses have been constantly counteracted with wisdom every time they arose, each time the craving gets weaker and the delusion gets weaker, and the belief that those impermanent things that can be made permanent gets weaker, the closer we move to the point of complete release, which is when that craving runs out completely and the wisdom is completely integrated. And at that point, one's consciousness can't go back to getting deluded by things, can't go back to getting infatuated by things, by experiences, by impermanent things, and go back to having hatred or hostility towards things. It just becomes completely wise, completely free. Yeah, I suspect I'm well over time. Leave it there. People have any questions that come up, feel free to sit a few minutes and then go ahead and ask. Not too bad.
No question, but just wanted to say thank you.
You guys in the back can come up if you like. Space.
You made it.
Thank you.
I do have a few questions from the last time we spoke. How do you practice non-attachment without becoming emotionally attached?
Oh. Oh yeah, the question was how do you practice detachment without becoming emotionally detached? So yeah, it's kind of like sometimes words get used in different senses in different contexts, and they're very different things. Like the detachment what I mean when I use it, and like the detachment that people would refer to as emotional detachment. So the main thing is that like the detachment that I'm talking about is extremely completely aligned and in tune with what's going on in your body, with what's going on in your feelings, with what's going on in your consciousness. And so you're dwelling in these wholesome emotional states, so the wholesome qualities of like kindness or compassion, or you can be more withdrawn in the sense of like just this internal happiness or objective observation. And like a fundamental quality of those four is that they're in their alignment, in their sense of balance, there's a sense of openness. And so you're actually very like in tune. Of course, kindness and compassion are more expansive and more sort of like, let's say, aligned with like other beings. But even with, if you're like fully in a sense of like just an internal happiness or objective observation, there's a sympathy there that never goes away. You might be, let's say, a little more withdrawn and like less like going out of your way to try to like, soothe and make people happy and peaceful. But there's like, because you're not moving into those states, you're also moving out of like this sort of narrow perception of your ego and your desires. And so you're sort of, your lens is widening and you're more sensitive to other beings. Doesn't mean you're taking responsibility for them or trying to get involved in their life or, fix them. It just means like you're sensitive to what they're going through. And if the opportunity presents itself to like be able to help them, then great. You may or may not be like actively seeking that opportunity, but as you move into those experiences of alignment, you're very sensitive to like everything that's going on. And I mean sensitive not in that like you have a thin skin or like, but you're just like, it's like our pain and like kind of blocks us up. And as we move into these aligned states, it sort of opens us up. And so we've just become more like, even if you can't do anything, like the person's in a situation, you're just like, there's a subtle like of awareness because you're in tune. And so when people might talk about like emotional disconnection, a lot of times you're actually like shutting out those feelings. And so there's kind of a blindness there of like to your own emotional experience. And then also you're like often closing down and blocking off. Yeah.
So I'm also trying not, yeah, sorry. And then, what do you do when anger comes up?
Do when anger comes up. Yeah, so I mean, like I was talking about, like the best antidote is compassion. If you can identify the pain that the anger is reacting to, and you can try to like address it with compassion, internal sense of like, oh, okay, what's going on? You're suffering, like, you just sort of start to see your own pain in the third person and start to like just try to stimulate that sense of like, oh yeah, you're really angry about this because you're in a lot of pain and like it's really painful. Let's just feel it for a while, just with a lot of patience, a lot of like support, a lot of, that's the best. Sometimes that can be not as, it can be difficult. When you're, it's like, I remember like back in my life, I remember like a comedian saying like, yeah, they gave me a lot of tools in anger management class, and they all work really well unless you're really, really angry. So sometimes you need to use kind of skillful means to like find a place where you're not being triggered, and like you can kind of like getting into nature is great, but fundamentally a space where you can kind of calm down and not make it worse. And so sometimes it just needs to like there's not really a shortcut to agitation. You just need to like let it calm. Like the snow globe's not gonna settle down faster than gravity is working. Like agitation and anger are sort of like that. You sort of just need to, you just focus on your breath, or you, the best you can, try to be like, okay, what does compassion feel like? Okay, pain. I don't want to keep feeling this pain. That's another aspect. You can kind of notice how anger is a painful experience and is making it worse. It's like, I don't want to keep doing this anger thing because it's so destructive and painful and so, just sort of put it in the forefront of your mind of like, I need to figure out how to get myself into a space where I can, diffuse a little bit and then try to get to a place of compassion.
I'll try to remember. Like this whole eclipse season, I've been thinking, and everything that you had said through the guided meditation definitely hit the spot on what's happening in my life now. So thank you.
meet you, Bhante.
Nice to meet you, Sri Lanka.
Yes, okay. And so happy with this show. I'm very thankful to the Kalyana Mittas introduced. Glad that I made it before 5 hours.
Yes, Kalyana Mitta helps a lot. So having good. The reference there was good friends. You know, the Buddha encouraged a lot. It's like it just the reality is almost pretty much none of us have the ability to completely do it on our own. So kind of taking a mental note and of people that make us better, that help us, you know, be our best selves and do good and not do bad and do things that are serving us long term and not do things that are not serving us long term. And yeah, that those people are tremendously valuable. Like each of us has, you know, strengths, and in the path to purity, you need a lot of different skill sets. So finding people that are aligned and trying to move in the same direction, and just supporting you, you know, just being there for you, because we're very social animals too, um, goes a long way. At one point, the Buddha, Ananda said to the Buddha, you know, oh, it's like my good friends are like half of the holy life, and he was like, no, they're the whole of the holy life. Because we're constantly learning from each other, from ourselves, from, you know, people that are farther along than we are, and then we chip in a little bit along the way.
I have a question. First of all, I'm so sorry that I was late. It's a 4 hour drive over, and it's a little traffic. But our heart is right there, and it's also on Zoom. So I apologize at first. I have a question that our mind is always angry, stubborn, sadness, depressed. We build a lot of toxin, negative energy in our mind, and sometimes we end up reaction to those issues that is not nice, and then we react right away. That we forgot our kindness and compassion, and then we end up hurting someone by talking by our gesture, and then we say ourselves, "Oh, we are human.
Yeah.
We do mistake." But I want to know how to prevent, because it's like a fire
Yeah.
that you mentioned before. A fire slowly, when it's not time to build a fire. So ourselves, we build too many fire, negative energy in ourselves, and then if suddenly something happens, we react right away. And sometimes I forget myself to stop thinking about that and just react back. And sometimes we explode, like putting gas into a fire, and it will worse. And some people cannot handle, and they have that too much anger, and they do something bad. How can I? What do we do to ourselves to help cultivate our compassion? I believe everybody is of us have a good heart, the inside, deep inside, but sometimes we are blind, or we are covered by all those negative things. How can we build, go back and build our own before it happens? To act before it happens. I hope you understand.
Yeah, I understand. It's a good question. There's lots of ways. But if I give you 10 ways, you'll only remember one of them anyway. So I'm going to give you one. And it's not just for you, it's for everybody. But what helps in trying to keep from going back into those old reactions, in addition to everything I already talked about and that you've heard many, many times, But if you want to just like a starting point of like, okay, how do I tomorrow when I go to work be less reactive? Is just make a point of slowing down. It's like whatever your normal pace is, just go a little slower. And the reactivity and the impulses are all pulling you around and they're speeding you up. And so when you like consciously be like, okay, instead of like rushing to like running to work, I'm gonna like walk to work. Instead of walking to work, I'm gonna walk like a little slower. And then like the like the cravings and the desires and the irritation are like the agitated states. So like they're gonna keep wanting to go, no, I want to get there fast, and I want to get the thing, and I don't want that one, and resolve it, and it's all going to pull you back into moving more quickly. And so if you can slow down, then it also creates that additional space to like reflect on like, is this the right thing to do? Or like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Or, like it just, everything moves a little more slowly. And as it moves a little more slowly, you get more space to reflect. And the more space you create, and that's really an ideal, that's maybe the next step of like, just trying to make it a policy of like trying to reflect on things before you say them. And again, not just for you, this is for everybody. Most of us can do better on this. The more carefully we speak, the more likely we are going to say things that we don't regret. And so, noble speech takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of like being okay with not speaking. So maybe that's all, tied together. The like slowing down, thinking before one speaks, and trying to develop the ability to be comfortable not speaking, just listening.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's okay not to speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Noble silence.
Yeah.
Silence is golden. Okay, golden is silent. Silence is golden. I know that before.
Yeah, no, it's very much like the Buddha encouraged us to speak when there's some benefit, and if there's no benefit to speaking, better nothing. better silence.
It's sometimes so hard to have that awareness right away before we react.
Yeah, it's
Even sometimes practice for me,
yeah.
and I like it that time. Okay, today I didn't talk, today I didn't react.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I forgot. And keep doing that. It's just like our mind. I feel like the mind is very cool for too many. But it's good thing you say slowing down. But it's really, will help slow down to think before we do something. Thank you.
You know how Christians they ask for forgiveness? Is there a way to just like correct our actions? Would that be like similar to doing that?
Yeah. So, that's a good question. I think it's a little deeper and broader than that. I mean, like correcting your actions is like very important. But I think forgiveness, and I like in Pali, in the Buddha's language, the word for forgiveness is the same as the word for patience, is the same as the word for tolerance, is the same as the word for acceptance. And so, like, when you think of forgiveness, not in just like a limited sense of like, okay, you harm me, I forgive you, we're good, we move on with our lives. But like in a general sense of like, okay, that was painful, it created pain, like, it's like a process of like experiencing the pain associated with that action that caused that pain. And in the process of letting that pain arise and passing away, you're not holding on to it or identifying with either the action or the pain caused from it anymore. Whether that action came from somebody else or you were the one that caused the action. But forgiveness, there's like it has a broader spiritual importance than just like, oh yeah, you just move on with your life and don't worry about it, or like, oh yeah, I did something bad, I'll try not to do it again. It's like if there's still some identification with that pain, that bad action that one did, or the bad action that somebody else did that I'm still holding it against them for, then it doesn't let you grow. It doesn't let that pain arise and pass. And so in the like acceptance of that action or the tolerance of that action of like, okay, yeah, that was wrong, either whether I did it or somebody else did it, and it sort of allows the pain to arise and to like pass, and then it's gone. And then it's really like, I mean, of course you should learn the idea from the beginning of like, yeah, I shouldn't do that again. But I think that's what the like broader spiritual meaning of forgiveness is, beyond just the like learn from it. Like learning from it is kind of like, it's an important thing, but it's also, there needs to be this other spiritual process of processing the pain that came from that experience. And then that's when we can really forgive and let go and really kind of move beyond it. Because we don't feel the pain anymore. Once it's come up and it's passed, then we're free. You know, we're just like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that, whatever. You know, I wish you well.
Did you go to the Buddhist church while you were out here?
No, I walked by, but they weren't open when I walked by. There's just, well, is there one here? Yeah, the one in Avila was the one. I walked by, but yeah, they weren't. They were closed while I was there. I think we're way over time. Any last calls from questions, even questions from the internet?
Well, I was just gonna see if I could. No questions here. I don't know if, yeah. Maybe you could just say if anybody that's watching on this wants to ask a question.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to just type them in. Otherwise, we'll give it a few minutes, and if nothing comes up, call it a night.
Or even unmute themselves and just ask it.
Yeah.
What do you think people misunderstand about Buddhism?
So a misconception I get was like a misconception about Buddhism. Yeah. I think the Four Noble Truths, like if they're, because most of the time the people wouldn't teach the Four Noble Truths, or the Buddha wouldn't teach the Four Noble Truths like just right off the bat. He would usually make sure they were pretty well understood, good qualities, bad qualities, like that there was like wholesome sources of pleasure and unwholesome sources of pleasure, and more aligning them with good sources of pleasure, more the kindness, compassion, and this sort of sense of neutrality, and then once they had a basis, he would talk about pain and all the painful aspects of life, because that's how you start to see the whole picture. And so I think when people just hear, okay, it's about pain, the origin of pain, or suffering, and the origin of suffering. I was walking on Armstrong one time. There was somebody that shouted from like across the parking lot, "Life is suffering. You're doing it wrong." So sometimes when people only just hear the Four Noble Truths without context and explanation, or understanding of the broader teaching, then there's a lot of space for misinterpretation. And so usually he would only teach people when they already, at least in the process of at least that teaching, we're already in the context of really wholesome states that expansive and pleasurable and aligned, and then he would teach how to look at pain, because that's what we're avoiding. It's not like he wants to look at pain just because he's a depressive, and specifically for depressive monks, because of course they were them. He wouldn't teach that. He would teach more brightening things like kindness and compassion and just coming into balance, and just this sort of progression through breath, sort of remembering or mindfulness. And so so he would teach things like death and all just the pain, but really the goal of those teachings was to bring people's understanding of the universe into completion, because our delusion wants to look at only the pleasure and shut out all the pain. And all of our own pain we don't want to look at because it was too overwhelming, and I don't want to go back there because it's too painful. So when one has sufficient understanding and peace and good qualities to be able to digest that and to understand things as they really are in their completion, then he would start to introduce oh yeah, and let's take a look back at some of that pain that we've been shutting out and suppressing and hiding, and bring it out into the open when we have a framework to experience it and to understand it and to let it arise and pass. And then through that, looking at the painful experiences in life, then you can start to see oh, I had a role in creating that pain. It was my own craving. It was my own attachment that created that cycle. I'm holding on to these things. I don't have to keep holding on to these things. And so, so these are subtle teachings that a lot of times it is the core of Buddhism. It very much is the centerpiece. But if you present it without any context, it can pretty easily be misunderstood.
I firsthand experience the same way that somebody shouted. I gave a book to a well-known mathematician professor, Hancuff Guṇavīro's Mindfulness in Plain English. The person was learned Buddhism. And the book was, it's talk about dukkha and suffering. And I just retired after a 40 year of a faculty career. Just rejected it. I felt oh my God, that misunderstanding of Dharma. It was on reading a one paragraph. Maybe it's that because in order to understand, you need some kusala or a merits in a past just to grab it, because that person is extremely capable of understanding the labeled logic, like math or anything, but understanding the Dharma is just even given to the hand, not take it? Is it because of you need a kusala? What's the interpretation? I may be wrong.
Yeah, you do need a kusala, or a kusala is like the Pali word for like good. I sometimes translate it as wholesome, but it actually means skillful. And it's probably the most common way that you would say good. There's two words for good, but anyway, that's one of them. So, but yeah, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But I mean, I think fundamentally, like the reason why most of the time it goes wrong is because yeah, we don't want to look at pain. It's painful. Like we're like, no, my life's already too painful. I don't want to look at pain. And so yeah, if you don't have like the spiritual preparation and the like moral background and like, then like just reminders of suffering is just sound too overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's kind of like immediately like, no, shut that door. I like it closed. I want those things suppressed. And you get to a certain level of perspective and spiritual development where you start to realize like, yeah, like the painful things and the difficult things and the grief in the morning, like they're learning opportunities. And there's something there that I'm holding on to, and there's no other way other than to look at them. But some people have a lot of pain, and it's a very delicate process that needs to happen because it's very common. Like as far as the other side of the experience, of like, you go through a traumatic experience, and then you get a reminder of the traumatic experience, and then you go through the whole process of opening it up, re-traumatizing yourself, and shutting it down again, and like no growth happened. Like you need a level of like balance and good qualities and like spiritual resilience, and all of these things get built by doing good and not doing bad.
See, that's with pekka.
But yeah, like if you, because this is, and from the suttas, like this is like a core like passage that happens all through the canon, that like, so the standard introduction to the Buddha's teaching was the Buddha would talk about generosity, and the Buddha would talk about morality, and he would talk about the downsides of sense pleasures and the benefits of renunciation. And then when he could see that their minds were ready and they were clear of any, they were like, they're like a newly made cloth that's ready for dyeing. Like when he could see they were ready, he would introduce the Four Noble Truths. Because if you introduce them before, you just start talking to pain that somebody's trying to suppress their pain, like they're like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was very careful about when and where, and that's something I've heard from the upper echelon of spiritually developed monks too, of like, sometimes you think you can just talk about Dhamma anytime, and it's either people are going to like get it or not get it. But no, you actually can do harm to people when you're talking about important spiritual truths when they're not open to hearing them and they're not ready to hear them. Like there needs to be a bit of like just sensitivity and like respect. Like that's one of the biggest things that I've tremendously appreciated about like the Buddha and his approach is like he's very respectful of people's autonomy. Like he would usually only teach someone that came and asked him a question. It would be really rare. He did sort of see, okay, this person's ready, and he would go and offer them a teaching. But normally it was like they came to him, they were, seeking, they had some level of like openness, and then he would offer them a teaching. So yeah, like the sense of, just like sensitivity to what people are ready for and open to. It's important.
I have the question is not my question.
Mm-hmm.
It's someone else's question, but I'm gonna record it and share with them.
Mm-hmm.
And probably maybe someone may ask that question too. A simple question. They say, why Wednesday walking all the way to San Jose to here? Sometimes barefoot and then just a bowl, take care of the bowl. Why is making so quick?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I said I can answer you that. I thought you asked the
To
Wednesday for
Tanga.
that.
Yeah.
13 to Tanga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
great answer, so I can share.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten that too, like, kind of like, trying to answer it kind of completely. It definitely is a higher level of renunciation than even like the Buddha required. That just the sense of leaving the monastery and living with uncertainty. It's kind of like being more protected in an environment where you're supported and people know you and you don't have to worry about things. Like it has benefits in that if you're clear about what's wholesome, what's unwholesome, what's good, what's not good, what's skillful, what's not skillful, that having really supportive environments can be very conducive to that sometimes. Having sort of supported environments too, like you have, because you're not enduring difficult circumstances and the elements and the hot and the cold and mosquitoes and poison oak and everything. That if you're already very motivated, that you can make a lot of progress just on your own. People bring you food or whatever. But on the other side, sometimes you can, when you're comfortable and you're protected and you're only around people that are supporting you and kind to you and respecting you, that you can fool yourself into thinking that you're detached when you're just not around any difficult circumstances or broader set of difficult circumstances. That when sickness comes around and you start to get irritable. When people start to insult you, your mindfulness starts to become weak. When you get tired, your mindfulness starts to shake. So eventually, we're trying to get to the point where we're done with our craving, and sometimes having a broader set of experiences when you are tired or hot or cold or walking 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 miles. It kind of pushes you physically so that any residual attachment to the physical level gets exposed. So if you're tired and you're free from any association with the body, you don't hold on to it, you don't think it's yours, you're totally at peace with it going out, then maybe you're a little tired, but but your mental state really isn't shaken. And when people insult you, if you don't have any sense of ego, or you don't have any sense of pride, or any sense of people pleasing or social safety issues, then it doesn't really do anything. It's okay, it's their business. You just move on with your day. And the same thing with when people praise you, you don't really take it about you. It's just they're seeing something valuable, good for them. You don't really identify with it. But when you start to move out into more exposed situations, both physically and socially, then you engage with a far broader range of experiences. And so it keeps you honest as far as okay, am I really holding on? Am I really letting go of this thing? Or am I just saying oh yeah, this is impermanent, I'm letting go, I'm not attached to my ego. But when you're tired and hungry and and people are saying things about you that you wouldn't necessarily choose to listen to, then you just get a test. You get it keeps you honest, because most of the time, unless you're completely at the end of the path, there is some vulnerability there. and it highlights like, okay, this is what I need to work on. Like, you know, all of these comments I didn't like, but that one stayed with me. Or, oh yeah, like, you know, this physical pain that's dragging me down, or illness that I'm dealing with, or sickness, or exhaustion, or whatever. Like, ideally, we're working to a point where there's still a calm, balanced awareness, even when the body is like almost shutting down. And so you're working with a broader range of like physical experiences, of experiential states, of emotional states. And so it's a good way to sort of push the boundaries. Like, it's not something I would recommend necessarily for most or even the vast majority of monks, especially young, because you do need a lot of training and sitting with your reactions to be able to have enough stability where you can still like maintain that sense of balance even under physically difficult or socially difficult circumstances. But when you do have a requisite amount of stability, then it's a good way to see what you're holding on to and start to let go, and to maintain a sense of robustness in that balance and peace and wholesome qualities, even among very, very difficult circumstances. Also, it's good for people to know there's monks in the world. So lots of people see me, and that's good for, you know, the zeitgeist.
The following question that they asked me is when they have fear, like sometimes it's snake,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I think stay in the forest,
Yeah.
and have some mosquito, snake,
Yeah.
or dog, or whatever. So how can he do it?
Well, I'd answer that question differently if I'm telling people how to deal with fear generally, or if I'm talking about myself. There's a teaching, an interaction with the Buddha where they're asking. He's talking about how he dealt with fear, and how he dealt with fear was when fear came up, and he was walking. He just like kept, you know, essentially more or less, he was walking back and forth. Walking meditation's a common thing. When fear came up, he wouldn't like stop his walking meditation until fear had subsided. Whenever he was standing and fear came up, he wouldn't sit down until the fear had gone away. Or when he was sitting, like essentially he wouldn't listen to his fear. Like, you stop feeding fear, and then fear gets weaker. And it gets weaker and weaker. But really, the deepest seeds of fear are you're holding on to something. Without attachment, there's no fear. You're holding on to something that you're afraid of losing, whether it's your own life or your ego or your identity or your sense pleasures, or you're avoiding pain, or, you know, there's fundamentally something you're attached to that's the root of whatever fear comes up. And so if you can not feed fear for long enough, it gets more manageable. And so it gets to the point where you can be like, okay, there's fear, or I'm feeling fear at a physical level, but it's okay, I know how to come back into balance. And it's just it's a process of like, fear's an agitated state, you need to stop feeding it and let it calm. And so you kind of go through that process enough times, and you just like, okay, I know how to deal with fear. I know, like you've sort of moved into a third-person perspective on fear of like, okay, it's just this experiential thing, and these like, my body's like buzzing, and maybe there's some tightening, but I know how to relax it, and I know how to move back to my breath and let my mind calm down, and kind of prioritize calm and settle. And when it's settled enough, you can be like, okay, what's that fear about? What am I holding on to that's fueling that fear? And whether it's your body or your feeling or your identity or death or pain or whatever, then you can be like, okay, well, I need to abandon the opposite of that. I need to abandon the pleasure into the body to stop identifying with the pain of not fearing the pain of the body. I need to stop identifying with the pleasurable feeling to stop fearing the painful feeling. I need to stop identifying with being right about everything so that I'm okay with being wrong. I need to stop identifying with like existing to get to a point where I'm okay with that. And so if you can get to a point where you know how to deal with the fear in the short term and come back into a balance, and then get to a point where you know what you're attaching to and let go of it when you're in the pleasure, then you're removing the seeds that are eventually manifesting as fear. And the more you do that, the more like it gets weaker and weaker and more under control. And then eventually.
What about your personal?
What's that?
It's personal.
My personal. You also develop a separate set of skills for just living in the forest. And also you, as a monk, of course, you're trying to maintain a very high standard of morality. And that comes across. It comes across in how you smell. It comes across in your just vibe that you're putting out. And so your own morality and your goodness tend to like insulate you like a lot. And the more you live in the forest, also you just get sensitive. Like, of course, like you're not scared of San Jose because you live there. You know how to be safe. You know what to do. You know what to not do. And if you're not more or less like stupid, of course, like anything could happen, but you know how to be safe in that environment. The more you live in the forest, the more you get sensitive to like everything that's going on in the forest. So you know how to deal with snakes. You know how to deal with mosquitoes. You know how to deal with like poison oak. You know like what the consequences of all of these things are, and you know how to be sensitive to like those other beings. And that same aspect of your own morality and your goodness and your generosity, like all that's kind of creating a vibe that is just kind of naturally emanating for you, but also the more you deal with your own like anger or cruelty, the more also you know how to deal with other people's anger and cruelty. And so if you already know like, okay, yeah, every time I get angry, I just need to deal with the compassion, and you have enough of a skill set where you can call upon that compassion, the more if somebody comes at you angry, you can just be like, oh, you're suffering, and if you're strong enough in that, like it'll diffuse it. Like those two sort of emotional, spiritual qualities can't really coexist for very long. Either they need to leave or you fall out of compassion. But the more you sort of develop those spiritual strengths, the more that you realize like, oh yeah, that's not just like a nice idea, like that protects you. So you get more fearless in that sense, because like I haven't done anything to anybody. There's no reason for anyone to hurt me. That I don't have anything to steal. There's not, and also they know that too. Like there's a level of like both the snakes and the people. There's a level of respect that comes with how you hold yourself. Like if you're walking through the forest with fear, then you're going to trigger a lot of predatory instincts in the animal. If you're walking through the forest with a sense of calm composure, like there's no way like an animal is going to be like, oh yeah, that fully grown human, that's like unless it's desperate and starving or something, like they're not going to touch it. It's not impossible, because sometimes they are desperate and starving, but like it's just it doesn't like you have a lot of different aspects that are protecting you. So that's another reason why I don't feel fear very much, because like you just know that environment, and you know how to relate to it, and like it doesn't make any sense for an animal to like prey on me. Of course, you could get a tick with Lyme's disease, and that could cripple you for a long time. But that's having a human body. Oh yes.
I am aware that I'm in a position of having said that I would make sure this is on Zoom.
Oh yeah.
But I have to go.
Oh sure.
So
Yeah.
I would want to just let Christine know that I'm going. And then I am also aware that some people came a long, long way and didn't have as much time with you as we had.
Yeah.
So I just want to say is that the carport's available if you guys want to continue or hear something.
Yes, no, great. Yeah, sadhu for all of your effort. Well done. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Sir? I just tell Christine, I don't know if you're listening to us, Christine, but I'm gonna shut this off.
Yeah, they've had more than their money's worth.